In the last 2 years, I'm sure that everyone has noticed a certain hysteria, a certain insanity which has been brought around by the pandemic. The crowd who watches CNN, Rachel Maddow, all these mainstream left-wing people have really been put into absolute insanity over this. You might have had to console a concerned family member who is losing it over this pandemic and the imminent death of humanity, or perhaps even a phone call from some family member you've not heard from in 10 years, inquiring after your vaccination status. The adherence to increasingly corrupt and authoritarian government initiatives, the hatred and violence that they feel in their hearts for those that they are told to blame for it. Someone in my family who I personally know was so scared about the pandemic that they gave themselves an autoimmune disease. And let us not pretend that this is not deliberate, as CNN executives say when they believe that no one is listening.
And our next thing is going to be for climate change awareness.
Do you think it's going to be just like a lot of fear, like climate?
Yeah, fear sells. Fear sells.
And it's really easy as someone who is not buying into all of this stuff to see this with your eyes and move on with your life. They're crazy, they're being manipulated, that's it. But this pandemic, or as my father has chosen to coin it, the Dem Panic, I believe is much more deep and more evil than one might initially believe. Chronic stress is a very real thing. It can lead to increased cortisol buildup in your brain, which leads to cognitive and physical impairment. The MRI scans of people with chronic high-level stress show exactly the same brain patterns as people with PTSD. And the stress of the masses comes from the fear of the coronavirus, which is propagated by the lying, manipulation, and scaremongering of the fake news media and the government. As Carl Jung says, it is well-known fact that patients who are suffering from fear are far more dangerous than patients moved by hatred or rage. This is what Carl Jung thought was the most dangerous threat to civilization, when mental illness becomes the norm, a psychic epidemic. One of the examples of a psychic epidemic which Jung cites is the Salem witch trials, where previously normal, rational people, when motivated by fear, when manipulated, lied to, and disconnected from reality, can do absolutely abhorrent and insane things as the normal. Individual psychosis arises from one's detachment from reality and the delusions of what is true and what is reality, despite the world proving them wrong. But this is how the fake news media operates. It constantly hides truth and things which go contrary to the alternate reality which they wish to establish. It repeats key phrases to establish connections between unrelated stories in order to utilize human pattern recognition to draw connections where there is not one, but it is convenient for there to be one for the narrative the fake news media attempts to push. It promotes endlessly stories which can be utilized to further the alternate reality and the narrative which they wish to push. Even if the story and the truth itself does not fit this narrative, they simply manipulate and skew it to do so. They have for decades been constructing an alternate reality already for the average American who watches TV to get their news and browses through articles on CNN.com. The only missing ingredient for mass psychosis is uncontrollable, inescapable fear, absolute fear. And with Trump, we saw them attempting to utilize this fear. We saw the fake news media stoking the fear as much as they could, and we saw things such as Trump derangement syndrome, but it wasn't enough. And I gotta say, the pandemic is sure as hell was enough. Psychosis happens when an individual is flooded with negative emotions, anxiety, fear, stress, panic, and if these negative emotions are inescapable, unconquerable, this leads to a psychic break. But great stress and anxiety does not always lead towards psychosis. It is the weak, those who are insecure and do not have a great ego, which fall prey to it. Those who are self-reliant, individualistic, and strong are proved to be even stronger in the face of great stress and anxiety. The positive reaction is to overcome, and the negative is to fall into psychosis. And this is where I believe we are in a psychic epidemic. And it is extremely dangerous because the leaders of this psychic epidemic, the leaders of the psychotic, are the government and the fake news media who perpetuated it, who began it. And what is personally most worrisome about all of this is what KGB defector Yuri Bezmenov said in the 70s. Once you poison someone's mind from reality, once you establish false truths as reality, you cannot undo it. Even if you force them to look at truth, at reality, at evidence with their own eyes, they will not be deterred. These psychotics in the psychic epidemic will continue undeterred to listen to those who they have been trained in their alternate reality to listen to as absolute truth tellers. They will continue to accept any trespass against them. They will continue to do anything they are told to do, and they will cheer and they will scream and they will laud anything bad, any punishment which happens to those they are told to hate. A psychic epidemic